For the sake of expediency, and because this is basically just the same thing the second, I'm going to splice in here my opening spiel from part 1. Skip to the timestamp on screen if you've heard it all before and/or you don't care and just want to get on with the fun stuff. Just so we're all on the same page, I'm defining a mech as a legged war machine with controls, pilot interface, and cockpit configuration more similar to a conventional ground or air vehicle. Ergo, if it's a suit you wear, it's power armor, not a mech. If its controls are more analogous to a motion capture setup, it's a mech suit, not a true mech. I realize this may seem like I'm splitting hairs, but I want to iron out these little wrinkles so I can cut down on needless detritus in the comment section. We've already talked about all the biggest reasons why battle mechs and powered infantry aren't a reality yet, why we all so desperately want them to be anyway, and what potential role a bipedal warsuit would play if we could somehow make them without having to enlist the services of one Albus Dumbledore. So now it only seems appropriate to me to discuss how we might potentially go about mating fact with fantasy in a more gritty, technical sense. The way I see it, there are 3 key areas in which we must advance in order to make mechs even potentially plausible, let alone viable, in any sphere other than our own wishful fantasies, and it's these that I'll be going into today. Starting us off, problem number 1, we lack a sufficiently simple and flexible method of mobilizing a mech's limbs. More than anything else, this to me is the quintessential reason why mechs are inherently inferior to every other form of military transport available to us at our present moment. For those who've not seen my other videos in 2024, if you want to make an artificial limb, your 2 main locomotive options are either hydraulic pumps or electrical servo motors, each of which come with their own unique set of technical quirks and limitations which make reliance on them in inhospitable environments a far less than ideal prospect, especially where life, honor, and/or victory are on the line. But the main issue is that both rely on a complex system of parts, lines, valves, solenoids, motors, the sheer number of things that all have to consistently go right, combined with all the infinitely creative ways each and every one can be made to fail, makes them a wholly impractical headache for any warfighter, and that's before anyone starts shooting at it. The most common and obvious proposal for fixing this problem is the invention of artificial muscle fibers, AMFs, and from a purely technical standpoint, it's not very hard to see why. Hypothetically, AMFs with even comparable mechanical properties to human muscle tissue would be many times less energy-hungry than motors, less finicky than hydraulics, while also being lighter than both. Now, I won't run you through every possible variant of this tech, or we'd be here all day. In simple brief, all muscle forms, natural or otherwise, work by expanding in one direction to contract the perpendicular one. The only difference, apart from material composition obviously, is the method of said expansion. However, the bad news is that all are either too materially fragile and/or have too short a power stroke to really have any bionic applications, or, like hydraulics, they require a pressure seal in order to work at all, and thus are suboptimal for use in highly volatile environments such as a battlefield. Problem number 2. We lack sufficiently light yet strong materials to build things with the body proportions of animals and the performance levels of machines that wouldn't tear themselves apart, but that doesn't mean we never will. I mentioned high-entropy materials in the power armor video. However, as you can probably guess, this is a very broad and still relatively new field which people far better versed than me are still working to get their heads around. So I'll keep this part to the barest essential basics and hope that I can find some picture examples to flesh it out with after the fact. Otherwise, I'll need to do some more research and report back in a future video. In simplest layman terms, as far as I understand the concept, a high-entropy material is one where the interatomic crystal matrices, that is, the repeating geometric structure of the atoms of multiple elements, are evenly interspliced so as to create a more perfectly homogeneous, entropic blending of their individual properties. Entropy referring to the dispensation of energy throughout a closed system. So, in theory, you could have an alloy with the strength of steel, the weight of aluminum, the conductivity of graphene, and the ductility of titanium. But like I said, this is probably the most speculative of the fields herein addressed, so don't take my word on it as gospel. Third and finally, we lack a sufficiently compact and energy-dense power source. Granted, this is a much more potent issue for powered exoskeletons than it is for mechs, but given that the main logistical hang-ups for armored units in today's militaries are caused by fuel supplies, or a lack thereof, it's still a relevant issue that deserves addressing. After all, no matter how well made or designed your fancy new war machine is, if it runs out of gas on the way to a fight, or worse, right in the middle of one, it's a big expensive metal brick. Naturally, the first and most obvious solution anyone with any amount of salient knowledge about the world we live in is going to think of for this problem is nuclear power. But of course, this comes with the problems of how to miniaturize a nuclear reactor, be it fission or fusion doesn't really matter. However, it occurs to me that such things would only really be necessary in exoatmospheric environments where there's no oxygen, or on exoplanetary missions without ready access to fuel. In truth, you'd only really need a machine's endurance to match that of its pilot. Human beings can't go for weeks or months on end without food or sleep, so of what use is a mech or power suit with a 15-year battery life? But here's the more complicated part. In a traditional vehicle, be it a tank, a car, a helicopter, or whatever else have you, the engine is directly responsible for the propulsion. A mech has no drive shaft to turn. At most, it would have an electric turbine, as its muscles are solely electrically motivated, which means we could get away with making our mech a hybrid, using a smaller engine, I'm thinking one of those tiny nitro engines they make for RC cars, to spin an alternator bank to keep the mech's batteries charged. That way you'd get the best of both, with the added bonus that the engine never has to physically move the vehicle, and so only needs to run when the battery gets below a certain percentage. Okay, that about does it for the gist. I'd wanted to go over these things in far more depth, but as I like to keep my scripts relatively concise, I think I'll make dedicated segments on each part if there's sufficient demand. If that's something you'd want to see, you know how and where to make your opinions known. In any event, you know the drill. Like and subscribe. Check out my books if you're a fan of science fantasy esoterica. And until next time, stay safe, stay sane, and remember, before you go getting lost in the clouds, be sure you have your feet firmly planted. Peace.